Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, June 23rd, 2025. All right, so we have a lot of stuff to get through today. So far, there has not been an Iranian response to the U.S. airstrikes on Iran. They are vowing that there will be a response, and we'll get into what the potential retaliation could be in one of the stories today. But the first thing to start with, President Trump suggests that he wants regime change in Iran. So President Trump suggested in a Truth Social post on Sunday that he seeks regime change in Iran, contradicting earlier statements from top U.S. officials who denied that was the goal of the military campaign. So this is what Trump said. Quote, "It's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? MIGA," end quote. So MIGA as in make Iran great again. And so, I mean, he wrote this again earlier in the day. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth insisted that the U.S. bombing of Iran's nuclear facilities and support for Israel's attacks on the country have not been about regime change. He was saying, we're not trying to do regime change. J.D. Vance made similar comments. But Trump's post suggests that regime change is the goal, and that the administration's calls for diplomacy with Iran continue to be a smokescreen, a deception. Last week, Trump did threaten the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, suggesting that the U.S. was aware of his location. He basically said, "We know where you are. We're not killing him yet," was essentially what Trump said. And Netanyahu has made it increasingly clear that his goal is regime change, and he insisted last week that killing Khamenei would end the conflict. And of course, that reminded many people of him in 2002, saying that taking out Saddam Hussein in Iraq would have positive reverberations across the Middle East. And he said that to Congress. He was one of the major proponents of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. And we also saw Israel Katz, the defense minister, last week threaten Khamenei, saying that the Iranian leader cannot continue to exist. So a big sign here from Trump that he may attempt to pull off a regime change operation against Iran. All right, the next one here. Trump attacks Representative Massie for opposing his illegal bombing of Iran. So on Sunday, President Trump attacked Representative Thomas Massie, Republican from Kentucky, over the congressman's opposition to his bombing of Iranian nuclear facilities, which was undertaken without any congressional authorization, making it illegal under the Constitution. So Trump said in a long post on his Truth Social account, quote, "Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky is not MAGA, even though he likes to say he is. Actually, MAGA doesn't want him, doesn't know him, and doesn't respect him. He's a simple-minded grandstander who thinks it's good politics for Iran to have the highest level nuclear weapon, while at the same time yelling death to America at every chance they get," end quote. And it was a very long post. I'll show you here. You know, I mean, this is like a huge rant that he went on against Thomas Massie because Massie came out against bombing Iran. Before Trump did launch these airstrikes, Massie introduced a war powers resolution in the House that would direct the president to remove United States armed forces from unauthorized hostilities in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Massie introduced the bill with Representative Ro Khanna, a Democrat from California, so it's a bipartisan effort. And it now has 42 other co-sponsors. They're all Democrats. Massie's the only Republican who is on board with this. So again, contact your House representative. Tell them to support this bill. And when Trump first announced the bombing of Iran on Saturday night, Massie said in a post on X that it was not constitutional. And in another post, Massie said that it was an act of war. And this is a response to many people who support the bombing of Iran, claiming that launching airstrikes is somehow not an act of war. So Massie said, quote, "When two countries are bombing each other daily in a hot war and a third country joins the bombing, that's an act of war. I'm amazed at the mental gymnastics being undertaken by neocons in DC and their social media bots to say we aren't at war so they can make war, end quote. So in his Truth Social post, Trump said that Massie was disrespectful to the U.S. military, just really went off against him. And he said that he's going to campaign in Kentucky to try to primary Massie. And Axios reported that President Trump, his political team, has launched a new super PAC dedicated to the goal of unseating Massie. It's called Kentucky MAGA. So the whole, all the political weight of President Trump is going against Thomas Massie. And what's the thing about Thomas Massie that makes him different from all the other Republicans in the House and the Senate is that he always votes against all the pro-Israel legislation, votes against aid to Israel, and he does not accept any money from AIPAC or other pro-Israel lobbies. And this has made him a target of AIPAC. They've spent big money on ads attacking him. And luckily for Massie, good, people like him. And when he comes under attack, he can raise money for his own campaign. And I think, because of that, Trump's going to have a hard time getting rid of him. But this is, really, and also, they've clashed over Massie's against the budget bill, the increases in spending. And they also clashed back in 2020. Massie was against the COVID stimulus that Trump signed into law back in 2020, and Trump called him a third-rate grandstander. So there is some history here. They seem to make up after that, but now because of his stance on this war, that's it. He's got to go. Again, contact your House representative. Tell him to support the War Powers Resolution that was introduced by Massie and Khanna, and also one has been introduced in the Senate by Senator Tim Kaine, so contact your senator as well. All right, so the next one here, J.D. Vance says, don't worry about Iran war because Trump is not dumb. So this is really something here. Vice President J.D. Vance on Sunday said that Americans who are opposed to another war in the Middle East should not worry because President Trump is not dumb. And he made these comments in an interview with NBC News where he justified and defended President Trump's bombing of Iranian nuclear facilities, which was carried out without congressional approval. So I'll just play this clip here. Ken Klippenstein posted it on X. This is a really shameful interview. I mean, the whole interview that he did justifying all this, playing into the phony narrative about Iran. He kept saying Iran's nuclear weapons program this, Iran's nuclear weapons program that, just leaving out the context that Iran actually does not have a nuclear weapons program, and that there's no evidence to support that it does. But this is what he says. He tells people not to worry here about getting sucked into another war. I certainly empathize
with Americans who are exhausted after 25 years of foreign entanglements in the Middle East. I understand the concern, but the difference is that back then we had dumb presidents, and now we have a president who actually knows how to accomplish America's national security objectives. So this is not going to be some long, drawn-out thing. We've got in. We've done the job of setting their nuclear program back. We're going to now work to permanently dismantle that nuclear program over the coming years.
So, and that's another thing that he says, is that they're going to work to permanently dismantle Iran's nuclear program. So it sounds like if Iran doesn't come to the table for a deal, which there's just no chance of that happening right now. I think all this talk about them wanting a deal, just as I said before, a complete smokescreen, deception. They're going to keep going at Iran, even if they tried to surrender. I believe that they would probably go into the next phase for a regime change. But he's saying that they're going to permanently dismantle Iran's nuclear program. So it sounds like if they start repairing these nuclear facilities that the U.S. has bombed, then the U.S. would bomb them again. I mean, that to me, that's the implication there. Again, this is just really shameful. And I mean, he really is. What makes Vance so bad is that, he acted like, he tried to make himself out to be like an anti-war guy, at least when it came to the war in Ukraine when he was in the Senate. He also spoke out against the war in Iraq. At the same time, right after he was elected, after him and Trump won the election, one of the first interviews he did, he said, you got to hit Iran hard. If you're going to hit him, you can't do these weak little bombing runs that Biden does in the Middle East. You got to hit him hard. And same thing with Trump. Even though he was campaigning about against war and saying, all these wars never would have happened if I was president, he was also very hawkish on Iran and saying he was the best friend Israel ever had. So, they were both really talking out of both sides of their mouths on the campaign trail. All right, so the next one here, Pope Leo pleads for peace after the U.S. bombs Iran. So Pope Leo XIV made a strong appeal for peace at the Vatican on Sunday in remarks that came only a few hours after the U.S. bombed Iranian nuclear facilities. So the U.S.-born pontiff referred to the U.S. attack on Iran as alarming news and urged the world not to forget about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, which has been caused, of course, by the U.S.-backed Israeli siege and genocidal war on the Palestinian territory. So Leo said, quote, alarming news continues to arrive from the Middle East, especially from Iran. In this dramatic scenario, which includes Israel and Palestine, the daily suffering of the population, especially in Gaza and other territories, risks being forgotten, even as the need for adequate humanitarian aid becomes even more urgent, end quote. And so these remarks come, people are forgetting about Gaza as dozens are being massacred and sometimes hundreds are being massacred every single day. Leo said, quote, war does not solve problems. Rather, it amplifies them and creates deep wounds in the history of peoples, which take generations to heal. No armed victory can compensate for the pain of mothers, the fear of children, the stolen futures. Diplomacy must silence the weapons. May nations chart their way forward with works of peace, not with violence and blood-stained conflicts, end quote. So, I do hope that him being American has some sort of, gives him a little more sway and influence over American politicians who are driving all these escalations. At the same time, right now, I'm sorry to say that I just don't have any hope for any kind of de-escalation in the region, but I think it's important to amplify calls for peace like this from the Pope, from the head of the Catholic Church, who is also American. All right, so the next one here, Iran may close the Hormuz Strait in response to the U.S. attack. So Iranian media reported on Sunday that Iran's parliament has voted to close the Strait of Hormuz in response to the U.S. bombing of 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. And this is a step that could significantly impact global oil markets and the global economy in general. So Esmail Kosari, a senior Iranian lawmaker, said that it was now up to Iran's Supreme National Security Council whether to go through with closing the waterway. So the parliament agreed to do it, and now it's up to the National Security Council. So roughly 18 million barrels of oil, about 20% of the world's consumption, move through the Strait of Hormuz each day, making it a vital choke point for global energy trade. And according to Newsweek, they quoted some experts who suggest that closing the strait could raise oil prices as much as 30 to 50%, potentially leading to a $5 increase in gasoline prices per gallon. I would assume that that's got to be the worst case scenario for, in the U.S. if our gas is increased by $5 a gallon. I mean, that's a huge increase. Just imagine what you're paying for gas now and add $5. But you see, the Strait of Hormuz, I mean, it could, if they close it, it cuts off the Persian Gulf, which is where oil from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, all go through there. And Iran has made clear that closing the Strait of Hormuz was an option if the U.S. launched a direct attack. Iranian officials have also warned that the Iranian military could hit U.S. bases in the region, which could lead to massive U.S. casualties, and an attack could be coming soon. Iran generally, they wait a bit before they retaliate to certain things. If you remember when Trump killed Soleimani, Iran didn't respond right away. They launched a missile barrage at a base in Iraq, I believe a few days later. Both times that they attacked Israel, there was a decent amount of time between when Israel, back in April 2024, Israel bombed Iran's embassy in Damascus, Syria, and Iran responded a few weeks later. So I'm not expecting, a quick retaliation here, but I think there is the possibility that they do something like this, close the Strait of Hormuz, And if they believe that the U.S. is going to try to open it by force, then I would expect them to close the Strait and also start attacking U.S. bases in the region. It could be kind of a double maneuver here. And Trump and his top officials, they're all threatening more attacks on Iran. Of course, if Iran does anything. Marco Rubio was asked if the U.S. would respond militarily if Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, and he didn't respond. But he said he wants to leave all the options on the table. His exact response was, quote, "I'm not going to take options away from the president. That's not something we're talking about right now in terms of being immediate," end quote. And Rubio acknowledged that it would hurt the U.S. economy if Iran did that, but he also suggested that it would be suicidal for Iran to shut down the waterway. And that's the same language J.D. Vance used. So it's kind of the administration's talking point is, Iran's not going to do it. It would be suicidal for them. All right, so the next one here, U.S. and Israeli officials say that the U.S. did not destroy the Fordow nuclear site. So Israeli officials and a senior American official told the New York Times that the U.S. bombing of Iran's underground Fordow nuclear site did not destroy the facility, despite President Trump's pronouncement that the attack completely and totally obliterated the nuclear facilities that were targeted. So two Israeli officials told the paper that the Israeli military's initial assessment, which is based mainly on satellite images, was that the strikes seriously damaged Fordow but did not completely destroy it. They said it appeared that Iran had evacuated the facility and removed enriched uranium, which aligns with a statement from Iran. They said that they evacuated all these facilities and removed the uranium. And it does make sense because Israel has been attacking their nuclear facilities, and they were expecting the U.S. to join in, so it does make sense that they evacuated these facilities. And the senior U.S. official also said the bombing did not destroy Fordow, but insisted that the strikes had severely damaged it, taking it off the table. The official added that even 12 30,000-pound bunker-busting bombs could not have destroyed Fordow. And you see this satellite image here of the aftermath of the attack. If you see these little holes in the ground, that's essentially the damage that you see from the satellite images, which shows that the bombs did penetrate the ground and did, probably explode pretty deep down. That's essentially what they're working with here. And before the attack, reports said that the Pentagon's Defense Threat Reduction Agency said in a briefing to officials that in order to destroy Fordow, the U.S. would likely have to drop a tactical nuclear weapon after softening the ground with conventional bombs. So we got more details from the U.S. military about the attack. They're saying that the U.S. bombers dropped 14 of these huge bunker-busting bombs known as the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, saying that they dropped 14 of them, and each B-2 bomber can carry 2 of these bombs. So it suggests that 7 B-2 bombers were involved. The military said that a total of 125 aircraft were involved in the attack. So fighter jets also launched missiles, and U.S. Navy submarines fired Tomahawk missiles at one of the sites as well. And Iran is saying that they're still calculating the damage, seeing how bad the damage is to these facilities. And the IAEA says that there's no sign of the radiation levels going up in the area around these nuclear sites, which does suggest that they removed the enriched uranium, the radioactive material. And of course, the U.S. and Israel launched these attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities under the pretext of preventing it, stopping Iran from developing a nuclear bomb. But before Israel launched the attack, U.S. intelligence had no evidence that Iran was working toward a nuclear weapon, and claims to the contrary have come from the Mossad, from Israeli intelligence. All right, so the next one here, Netanyahu convinced Trump to expand Iran attack beyond Fordow. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So according to a source speaking with the Jerusalem Post, President Donald Trump informed Netanyahu days before the attack on Iran that he had made a decision to strike the Islamic Republic's Fordow nuclear site. In the following days, Israel convinced the U.S. to expand the attack to other facilities. So essentially saying, Trump told Netanyahu, all right, I'll bomb Fordow. And Netanyahu convinced him to also hit the facility at Natanz. and Isfahan, the ones that he ended up bombing. And this report shows, and other reports show, that a decision was made before this past week that the U.S. was going to bomb these nuclear facilities, and that Trump's saying, "Oh, I'm going to decide within 2 weeks," was deception, was a lie. He knew at that point that he was going to launch the airstrikes. And one thing I think I forgot to mention yesterday, it turned out that Seymour Hersh was right. He had that report saying that the U.S. was ready to attack. We had a report last week from Scott Horton, who had sources who told him that it was inevitable that the U.S. would bomb Iran. They expected it to happen earlier, but those sources ended up being correct as well. All right, so the next one here, Iranian negotiator thought killed by Israel is alive. So this article is from Middle East Eye. So a senior Iranian negotiator who is suspected killed in an Israeli airstrike in Tehran last week is alive, according to Iranian state media. Ali Shamkhani, an advisor to Iran's supreme leader and representative at talks with the U.S., was thought among the senior Iranian officials reportedly killed by Israeli attacks in the early hours of June 13th. However, on Friday, state media in Iran carried a letter from Shamkhani addressed to the supreme leader in which he stated he was in fact alive. And he said, quote, "I am alive and ready to sacrifice myself. Victory is near. The name of Iran will be immortalized in the highest history as usual," end quote. So I covered that. I believe it was Iranian media reported that he was killed. And I covered it because he was a very senior Iranian official who said he wanted to deal with the U.S., said Iran would reduce uranium enrichment levels, ship off its enriched uranium in exchange for sanctions relief from the U.S. But that was not good enough for the Trump administration. They demanded the zero enrichment, which was essentially a poison pill to ensure that negotiations didn't go anywhere and that we would end up where we are today. All right, so the next one here, the Israeli military slaughters 48 more Palestinians in Gaza, and the picture in this story is very sad. Gaza's health ministry said on Sunday that Israeli attacks killed at least 48 Palestinians and wounded 104 over the previous 24-hour period as the U.S.-backed genocidal war continues, with much of the world's attention focused on the U.S. attacks on Iran. The health ministry said that the bodies of another 3 Palestinians killed by previous Israeli attacks were also recovered. And look at this picture, this little boy who was hit by an airstrike and is covered in burns, and another boy next to him on the same hospital bed and then you see another boy who is injured in the background. This stuff, you see this stuff every single day coming from Gaza. This is the regime that's perpetrating this genocide that the U.S. is waging a war against Iran for now. It's just completely despicable. And medical sources told Al Jazeera that at least 6 Palestinians were killed on Sunday while seeking aid, and the daily aid massacres continue. And since the end of May, over 400 Palestinians have been killed by the IDF while seeking aid. So absolutely horrific. And Israeli airstrikes and shelling also pounded targets across the Strip. Lots of attacks on tents in southern and central Gaza. And these boys were hit by an Israeli airstrike in the Al-Mawasi area, which is a tent camp of Khan Yunis in the south. Just crimes being committed every single day with our tax dollars, with American bombs and military equipment. All right, so the next one here, we have a story from 972 magazine by Ahmed Ahmed and Ibtisam Mahdi, who are Palestinian journalists in Gaza, just about, it's titled, "The Hunger Games Inside Israel's Aid Death Traps for Starving Gazans." And there's just stories here about families, Palestinians who, making their treacherous journey to these aid sites. In the first story here, one man, a 23-year-old, went with his young brother who was 19, and only one of them came back. And one of them says that they were close to the food and that they heard shelling and gunshots and that they didn't even care. They were just like, the food's right there. I might get killed, but I need the food. Or in this case, it was a bag of flour. So it's just, what is there to say about these atrocities and this hell that the U.S. helped Israel create in Gaza? The fact that this goes on every day, what does it say about us? That it's just kind of faded into the background. All right, so the next one here, 22 killed in suicide bombing of Damascus church. This article is from Jason Ditz. So an enormous number of Christians were killed today, and this was on Sunday, in the Dula area of the Syrian capital of Damascus when a suicide bomber detonated a bomb during a Sunday mass at the Mar Elias church. State media initially reported 9 killed and dozens wounded, but the number has continued to rise throughout the morning. 22 have been killed in the latest report, and the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights put the toll around 30 killed and wounded, so 30 total casualties. And the church is badly damaged. You see the picture here. I mean, it's just horrific to see. In other pictures, you can see blood splattered on the wall, splattered on icons. Just a horrific thing here. And this is the largest attack seen in the capital city in years, and sorely undercuts the ruling Hayat Tahrir al-Sham pledge to protect religious minorities when even in the capital city, groups are able to carry out such attacks. And this is Damascus. I mean, this has been a home to Christians for 2,000 years. And I have a book. It's called Syria Crucified by Brad Hoff, and it's just essentially interviews with Syrian Christians, their experience during the war in Syria, and living under Assad and everything, and how things got much worse for them when the war started. And here, this is just absolutely horrific. So the Syrian Interior Ministry, so this is the government, the HTS-led government, they're saying that it was 2 ISIS-affiliated men involved in the attack. They entered the church and opened fire first before detonating a suicide vest in the crowd of worshipers, causing far more casualties. And this is a very old church here. Actually, this church itself was built in the 19th century on the site that it is held that the prophet Elijah sheltered in the during the in the Old Testament times. And a lot of the artwork in the church dates back to the 12th century, the icons and everything. So just absolutely horrific. The next one here, Israel kills 1 in strikes along Lebanese coast. Another one from Jason here. So there's several attacks, Israeli attacks on Lebanon over the weekend. On Friday, an attack on a motorcycle in southern Lebanon killed 1 person. The Israeli military, as usual, claimed that he was a top Hezbollah commander. There was no confirmation from the Lebanon side. And then on Saturday, the Israeli Navy launched an attack in southern Lebanon, claiming that they targeted Hezbollah infrastructure. Again, no confirmation from the Israeli side. So the Israeli attacks in Lebanon continue. And so far, Hezbollah, I don't know what their capabilities are now, if they're even really capable of launching attacks, any significant attacks on Israel. But I do think there is a possibility, if they are, that, if Iran is planning and sees that Trump is going to go for regime change, and that they're at war with the U.S., if Hezbollah is capable, it could be a multi-prong attack from Iran, Hezbollah, the Iraqi Shia militias, the Houthis in Yemen. It could be, the axis against the U.S. and Israel. I think that is a possible result of what we might see here. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. launches 2 more airstrikes in Somalia. So U.S. Africa Command announced on Saturday that its forces launched 2 more airstrikes in Somalia as the Trump administration continues to bomb the country at a record pace. And this is an air campaign with virtually no media coverage. I've been checking lately. There's nothing. I mean, all I'm working with here is press releases from Africa Command, from U.S. AFRICOM. But, and I Google U.S. airstrikes in Somalia. I haven't done a very exhaustive search, but I haven't been able to find any U.S. media reports on these airstrikes. And I didn't put too much detail in here. I just want to keep track of these. I'm going to try to kind of expand on the coverage of Somalia. But so these airstrikes were launched on June 14th and June 15th. One, AFRICOM said, was against al-Shabaab in the south, near Mogadishu, and the other was against ISIS in Puntland in the northeast. So the U.S. is actually involved in 2 different wars in Somalia, and nobody's aware of this. And this brings the total number of U.S. airstrikes in Somalia to at least 42 in this year alone. And Trump is well on the way to break his previous record of 63 airstrikes in the country, which he set in 2019. All right, so the last story here, Mahmoud Khalil vows to speak up for Palestine. So this article is from Al Jazeera. So this was some good news that happened over the weekend. On Friday, Mahmoud Khalil, the former Columbia student, green card holder, He's a Palestinian refugee from Syria who's married to an American, who has an American child. He's been released from jail. The Trump administration was trying to deport him. He's been released from an ICE detention facility. So this is good. This was the most high-profile case. This was the first person that they tried to deport for criticizing Israel. And the Trump administration has been losing all these cases, which is very good because the administration admitted itself that they were going after Khalil and others for their speech because they're critical of Israel, which Rubio claims hurts American foreign policy. So it is good to see these cases, these people being released. And of course, the administration, I believe, is going to keep trying to deport them. But again, he's married to an American. They just had a child, and he missed the birth because of all this. But it's good to see that he's out now, and he's back out. He was back out on the street protesting. All right, so that is it for the news. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Ted Galen Carpenter. Trump never has been a sincere advocate of realism and restraint. One from Norman Solomon. Bombing Iran is part of the USA's compulsion for war. One from Dan Steinbach. Trump bombing Iran, preserving U.S. and Israeli nuclear supremacy in the Middle East. One from Ahmed Moore. Why do so many Americans join the Israeli military? And our spotlight is from Aaron Mate. Trump's attack on Iran is unconditional surrender to Israel. So please go check all that out. Lots of stuff at antiwar.com. I feel like there's something I wanted to mention at the end of the show, but I can't remember. So I'll just tell you what I always do, and that is if you want to support this show, share it with your friends, like, subscribe, comment. If you want to help out antiwar.com with a monetary donation, go to antiwar.com/donate. Contact your representative, your senator. Tell them to get on board with the War Powers Resolution. Oh, one thing I want to mention. So Dave Smith interviewed Dan McKnight on his show, Part of the Problem, and they talked about Defend the Guard, which is something I haven't talked about in a while. But it's this statewide movement. It's state-level legislation that, if passed and if it becomes law, it would prohibit the federal government from deploying a state's National Guard to an area where Congress hasn't declared war. So it would seriously restrain the federal government's ability to wage these wars. And it's an important movement to get involved in. I always put the link for phone banking in the description. So check that out. Go check out that interview of Dan McKnight on Part of the Problem with Dave Smith. So that is everything. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.